Welcome to Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, the podcast that gives you an unfiltered behind-the-scenes look at what it's really like being a woman in the middle who's over 50 and following her entrepreneurial dreams. Grab a superhero cape, girlfriend, because you deserve one. I'm your host, Master Certified Life Coach and Midlife Mentor, Suzy Rosenstein, and I am excited to inspire you with interviews that feature all of this midlife amazingness. Let's go. Hey there. Welcome back to the show. We have a really exciting interview ahead of us about leaving the working world to be a stay-at-home mom for 15 years and then making the decision to go back as an entrepreneur. Today, you'll be meeting Elizabeth Pearson Garr, a woman in the middle entrepreneur who's using her skills and experience as a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and TV producer now in a podcast business that shares inspirational stories about people who do extraordinary things. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Suzy. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, you know, I love talking about podcasts and two podcast people and all the things. So this is going to be great. I know we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about your midlife entrepreneur story. We'll be talking about your business, what's going really well, and also what midlife issues might be getting in your way to some extent and are challenging for you, maybe in your life as well as being a business owner, all that stuff. So let's get started with how old you are, how long you've been an entrepreneur, a little bit about your journey, which is so interesting, and what you do in the world. Take it away.
Okay, thanks. I am 54, and I have been an entrepreneur for about 2 years. I actually tried to start my podcast a little bit sooner, but something called the pandemic got in the way. And I ended up starting a backyard pod school for both of my kids at the time with some friends. We decided to take our kids out of public school at the time and create sort of outside learning. We live in California, so we could do that. So that derailed my podcast dreams for a little bit of time. And I finally got going kind of mid-pandemic, thinking more seriously about my podcast, actually took an online course through Stanford, and then finally actually launched my first episodes about a year and a half ago. And I decided to do it because I'd been thinking for a long time, several years, I'd been loving my time at home with my kids and doing a lot of volunteer work in the community and in the schools. And it just kind of, this tipping point happened where I felt like now people are asking me to do things that I'm not loving doing anymore. And now I want to get back to things that I really want to do. I want to start making it my focus rather than people expecting things of me. So what do I really want to do? And I started thinking of things I had done in the past. And a lot of the work I've done in the past has been in journalism, like you said, documentary filmmaking. I've worked in television, and I live in Northern California. And in the past, I've worked in many places, but most of the work that I've done has been like in Los Angeles and in New York. And I'm not going to move either of those places right now because I have 2 teenagers and a husband. And so I thought, what can I do that combines a lot of my interests and my skills? And I thought, what about a podcast? I love podcasts, and I could use my research, my interviewing, my editing skills, and I could just dive into that. So little did I know how much work it would be. I expected it would be, of course, challenging. And that's part of the appeal of starting something new is you get to learn new things. But it really has been interesting how much you get into something knowing what you know, and then you have no idea what you don't know. So
probably a good thing.
I was just going to say my naivete, I think, actually was probably helpful because otherwise I might not have done it. And I think it is really great to sometimes just dive in.
Exactly. Wow. So what is your favorite thing about the podcast direction?
Well, as it turns out, it's so funny how things kind of develop. You're drawn to certain things and then they kind of can reveal themselves over time sometimes. So I spent a lot of time thinking, what should be the focus of this podcast? I have so many interests. It could have gone in many, many directions. And finally, I decided on, I've actually changed the name. It was initially called the Experience Podcast. The focus has remained the same. Now it's called What It's Like To. So I interview people who've had unique and interesting, intriguing experiences that most of us would never have. So it's kind of like walking in their shoes for a little bit. And so and I just thought, well, that's because I just love behind the scenes stories. I want to find out, what it's like to summit Mount Everest. I want to find out what it's like to attend the Academy Awards. I want to find out what it's like to be a pro baseball player. There's so much I want to find out about. And what I've realized over time is that, yes, I love finding out about those people's experiences. But what I really have loved is this message that they're all conveying. It's a message that I need to hear, which is follow your passion, keep going, even when it gets tough, and don't give up. Because there are many times that in the past, I have wanted to do that because I've always followed my creative passions. I've done these very non-traditional kind of jobs. And in this journey of starting this podcast, which I kind of alluded to, had more challenges than I would have anticipated. There's many times it would be very easy to give up. And a lot of podcasters do give up, as you know, as well, because most, they call it pod fade because it's just, it becomes a bit of a grind after a while. People think it's a lot.
That's the word I use.
There's so much of it that's really fun. But it's work as well. It's not just this wonderful thing that we're doing now, which is chatting with other interesting people. There's a lot of work behind it as well. And so you have to kind of keep your eye on the prize and figure out what do you actually want to keep doing. And so the guests that I get to talk to and the messages that they keep conveying to me, which is I had a dream or something that really interested me. And yes, there was this hard time, but I fought through it. I interviewed a guy who, went to the Olympics and won an Olympic medal. Was that an easy journey? Was that just this uphill trajectory that he just kept going? There were no challenges. No, I mean, he had injuries, he had setbacks, but he kept going. And so that's what I have found really interesting as this has unfolded. I've realized these people speak to me because it's a message that I need to hear.
Yeah. We want certainty, And so now you took a non-traditional path in your career that was much more entrepreneurial, even though you weren't technically, you didn't call yourself an entrepreneur your whole career, right? But I think because we're as old as we are, we grew up thinking that things should be certain, like you should get a job and you should stay there for a long time. And then people will respect you because of your seniority. And then you'll retire. And then we had ideas of what your retirement looked like too. And none of that's true.
No, it's really funny. True. My very first, when I graduated from college, I had wanted to be a food writer. And my parents were really supportive. And they said, okay, well, you can go to cooking school because everyone said, if you're going to be a food writer, you need some expertise. And after cooking school, it's really hard to become a writer, right? Like you just can't usually get a job at a publication. But there was a certain job at a public relations firm that specialized in food accounts. And so everyone thought, well, that's a good way to go because as you were saying, that was a certainty. That was you get in as an assistant account executive, then you become an account executive, then you become a senior account executive. And I thought, okay. And my parents were like, look, and there's benefits. You get your benefits. I heard so much about benefits as a 22-year-old. And I thought, well, okay, I'll get my suits and I'll, get I felt like life was supposed to be like Glamour magazine pictured it.
Yeah, 100%.
Like have my outfit and have my grocery bag with the baguette hanging out of it and my apartment in the city and all that. And I hated that job.
Yeah.
It was not for me. And after about 9 months, I was so miserable. I was really depressed. And finally, I remember saying to my parents that at least they were supportive and they said, you can quit. You're young, you have possibility. You're not beholden to this company. But I remember telling my supervisors, I'm going to quit. And they were so upset with me. I think because they were like you said, they were in that track and they were of that mindset. Like, wait, we've paid our dues. We're staying on this track. Who do you think you are, this young upstart? And one of my supervisors actually said, Elizabeth, this is not like school. You don't just quit after 9 months and get a summer vacation. Who do you think you are? And I was like, I am not pretending I need summer vacation. I don't want to work in PR. And I think it's just that I always knew I was a more creative spirit. And that just wasn't for me. I wasn't trying to make a commentary on them. I just needed to be me.
Yeah, that's so good. And I really have caught myself. Well, it's been pointed out to me that some of my opinions to my three sons in their 20s aren't welcome. When I say things like, don't you understand the concept of paying your dues? They're like, that's ridiculous. It's they're so different now. But really, we grew up thinking that things should be a certain way. And as an entrepreneur over 50, we're challenging all of it. We're challenging all of it and challenging ourselves because these narratives do pop up. And yeah, just even the way you're thinking about what your entrepreneurial podcast journey will look like. And then having to be a beginner again to learn all this stuff that you thought you would know because you're older and wiser. You've been around the block yet.
Tell me about it.
There's so much to learn.
Well, because the world has changed too. I mean, part of it, even if the world hadn't changed, because I had been out of the working world, certainly a lot of the things I did and my volunteer work and everything was totally applicable. And there's so many moms who aren't getting paid for their work, or women, I should say, who aren't, and men, I'm sure, who aren't getting paid for work, who are doing incredible work in the world right now. But then when you try to get back into the working world, it's like, wait, it's kind of square peg, round hole scenario. And then you put technology on top of it. And one of the huge things for me, this is not going to be a surprise, I'm sure you've heard this 1,001 times, is just social media.
Yeah.
Because of course, I'm aware of social media. I've been around it and sort of on it. But that's one of the ways that for podcasts, everybody said best practices, just start marketing your podcast on social media. And I was like, well, I don't really use social media. So it's not like I have thousands of followers already. Suddenly I'm starting kind of from zero. Whereas if I was 25 years old, sure, that's a great way to start marketing my podcast. It's much different being 52 versus being 25 with social media. And so that was a major change for me and still is. You know, I actually hired one of my nieces who was in college my first summer before I launched the podcast. I was like, do you know anyone who wants to help me with social media? And she said, oh, sure, hire my roommate. So that was the perfect way to go. Get a 21-year-old.
Well, and also what I thought you were going to say, but then I remembered you have a very different background than I do. I thought you were going to talk about the tech related to recording the podcast, because that's been a challenge for me. But you have much more familiarity with that. But for me, sometimes I turn on the software to do the recording and the settings have changed. And I didn't change them. Well, at the beginning of doing the podcast, I would sweat. I would break out into a sweat. My heart would race because I just felt like I'm an idiot. I don't know how to deal with this technology. And I didn't. I knew how to press record and I knew how to download. I didn't know how to do anything else. Now I know how to Google things and I've solved a few problems and I have more confidence. But at the beginning, I felt very out of sorts, just like in over my head.
Yeah, no, I have that also. And my husband is my tech support. And I will sometimes be like, hello, and, creating a website. And there's just a lot of things that I feel like, and I'm sure it's this for any business, at least I would hope I'm not the only one out there that.
You're not. I know whatever it is you're going to say, you're not the only one.
There are things that you get into something because you love X, Y, and Z about it. But then there are all these other things that are necessary to keep it going. And you have to learn it, and you can learn it because you're smart and you're a bright person. You can learn that, but there's only so many hours in the day. And so I don't want to focus on learning all of these things about new technology or social media or marketing practices or whatever. Like I can do it, but I can only spread myself so thin. I mean, there's a lot to do with this podcast. I still have a family. I still have a life to live. Like it's really hard to balance all of these things. And I'm not just in an office where they say, here are your priorities for the day. I am creating my priority list.
Exactly. Elizabeth, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. This comes up a lot in my community. It's like, yeah, we're smart. We love to learn and we love to help people. So if I can share and help inspire somebody and they can apply something to their lives, that's great. But when it comes to living your life, I know some people don't even think there's something called work-life balance, but many of us use the term and we know when it's off. We know when it's off, but really it's off because we're not living in a real coachy term in alignment with our priorities. We haven't figured out exactly what is the most important thing. it's so easy to just get caught up in the weeds and not take a step and look at a higher level. What am I really doing here? Am I spending my time wisely? Is this what I want to be doing? Am I getting the results from the things I'm spending so much time and money on? Just like all of it. And there is this part of the learning curve of how to have whatever balance is you're looking for.
It's really true. I've gone through periods with this business of just realizing that I was working on it at every spare moment. Of course, when my kids are at school and then they would maybe come home from school and be like, okay, chat with them for a little. And then they're doing their homework. So I'm back at the computer, I'm doing something. Yeah. And then on the weekend, if they're busy, I'm working. And it was just kind of got to be almost like this thought of, okay, when are people busy so I can go back to work more? And it's a little crazy making because you need some space. You need some buffer zone between the work time because the work is here. It's in my house and my family is in my house. And I just need to be able to turn it off. And that has taken me some time to have that discipline to say, just because the computer's there and there's always work to be done, it doesn't mean I have to be doing it right now. I can sit and I can go for a walk with my husband and my dog. I can watch some TV with them. And like my older daughter's a basketball player and I knew basketball season was coming up. And I thought, I am not going to miss those basketball games just because there's work to be done. No, you have to prioritize things and just say, there's always going to be work. There's always work that needs to be done.
There's always work that could be done.
That's true. There's always more.
There's always more. Yeah, there's always more. But should or need, it's usually more subjective than we think.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I catch myself with that too. It's usually more subjective than we think. Like sometimes I freak out about my podcast schedule and my kids want me to do something or they see me working on the weekend or later at night. And I'm like, well, I have to get ahead because podcast day is Monday when I produce the other podcast and I have to get this done because Monday's a holiday or something like that.
Yeah.
They're like, well, why do you get it done? Isn't it your podcast? And I'm like, well, that's a very good point. It is my podcast. I want to get it done because I've decided that my goal is to produce them weekly. But could that change? Yes. Are there other ways to do things? Always. So it's a great conversation about priorities and my experience personally and working with my community is that it's something that we need to check in with always. I had a coaching call today and we were talking about it. It's constant. Because fortunately we've got lots of interests too.
Yeah. And you need to grow as a person too. I mean, I am loving this, like growing in this professional realm. It's what works for me right now. I think everyone just, if you can know yourself, check in with yourself of where you are at different times. There were times when I was home with my kids that I wasn't ready, and then I was, and so it was a privileged position that I was able to not be in the paid workforce for a while. I realized, but then I wanted to get back into it. And just a story on that. My kids were, I think, 3 and 5. And what seemed like the absolute perfect dream job kind of fell into my lap. Through a friend of mine, I was offered a job to work on a documentary film with a Oscar-winning producer. And I mean, if you had scripted out a job, this couldn't have looked better. And I said, well, I have these 2 kids at home. And he said, well, you can do it part-time. And I thought, part-time? I don't have it. My 3-year-old's in nursery school, like 5 hours a week. Like I don't have any nanny. And I just thought, how could I pass this up? This looks so good. And I went to Costco right after this interview with this offer. And I ran into a friend of mine and I was nearly crying. And she said, what's going on? And I told her, and she said, I think maybe the fact that you're crying in the frozen foods of Costco is telling you something about your reaction here. And what kept going through my mind was, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I told him and he was wonderful about it. But I just thought the reason that was such a blessing to me that happened was it showed me that I was actively choosing my life at the time. I wasn't just sort of default oh, I'm just here with my kids. I had an opportunity to do something else that didn't feel right at that time. And then it did feel right to choose something else later. And so my husband has always been wonderful about that too. time to reevaluate, time to reevaluate. And I think sometimes we need to just do that with ourselves too. Like reevaluate where you are, what you're doing with your business. Like, is it kind of in balance enough? Like you were saying with, working too much on the weekends or maybe working too much in advance for a vacation coming up or whatever. We just have to try to stay in touch with yourself.
Yeah, we're very disconnected when we get on the road to busy,
Yeah.
because we care so much. We're such high overachiever types. And it is very easy to just get too busy and believe that there are no options. That's why I talk a lot about creating a midlife operating system, like the system that we grew up with coming from growing up in the 70s for so many of us. It doesn't work right now in our 50s and more doing what we're doing now. It's a very different life than what we grew up with.
Yeah.
And we need something that we create to help us uphold the priorities that we have that are current and active and chosen,
That is so true, because we change. I mean, we're still sort of intrinsically the same people, but we have clearly changed since the 70s, and times have changed so much too.
Huge.
So, yeah.
Sometimes somebody says I was 50 years ago. I'm like, wait, what? 50?
How?
What happened? Okay, so one of the things I'm really fascinated with on this podcast is this collision between midlife crapola and you trying to do what you want to do for your business. So tell me a little bit about how that has come up for you.
Well, that phrase that people always talk about, that the sandwich generation, that is me in full right now. Because I had kids later. I had my kids at 38 and 40. I didn't get married till I was 37. And so then I had my babies at 38 and 40. So they are currently 14 and 16. So we are full in it with two teenage girls. And we have, fortunately, all of our parents are still living and in our same town. So I've got two teenagers, and my husband's parents are 88 and 90 living in town, and my parents are in their mid 80s. So we have a lot of family and a lot of things going on. And fortunately, our parents are fairly healthy, but still, there's a lot to do. It's not like, I think there's a lot of people in their 50s who are kind of empty nesters or feel like, oh, I'm going to do my own entrepreneurial gig once my kids are out of the house. So there's that part. And then also my husband is kind of winding down his career life. He was just gangbusters. He's 7 years older than I am. So he was just go, 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 go. And then kind of a couple years ago, he was like, I've been working so hard and I want to start taking it easier. Just as I'm feeling like, hey, I want to start going gangbusters. And so that feels like, wait, kind of a mismatch here. In some ways, it's not a mismatch. In some ways, it's great because as I am working harder, I'm like, hey, you're carpooling so-and-so over to basketball practice and her to her rehearsal. And, you got to pick up on some of the stuff that I can't do any longer. But on other times, it's kind of strange. Definitely me doing this, working more was a real family readjustment. Other people can relate to this. If there was one parent who was home for a while, it really shakes up the family dynamic.
AKA expectations.
Oh, totally. I mean, it was months. It wasn't like a few weeks of like, let's get used to the fact that mom's now working. It took months, and there are some waves that it still sometimes hit of like, wait, what? You can't take me there? Or I will like have my headphones on, actively working, and they'll be like, mom. And I'll be like,
I know. And people think, my husband thinks that, getting the dishwasher repaired it's difficult. Because those repair people give you a wide number of hours that they might show up. And I said, I can't do it. Just because I'm home doesn't mean I'm available.
Yes.
I have strict appointment times. I'm doing podcast interviews. I'm coaching clients. I need privacy. I just can't, I'm not always here just because I'm always here.
Yeah, you're not available just because your body is in the house.
That's correct. And also when the doorbell rings, the dog goes crazy. Like, really been hard to lock things down. I totally hear you. But your kids are younger and they are still needing things.
Yeah. definitely. And, that old axiom of like when they're little, they need you physically, and when they're older, they need you emotionally. And I
Yes.
used to think, oh, I can't wait. I can handle it. Like I can handle the emotional stuff, but the physical, I just need to sleep. And now that they're older, I'm like, I mean, I can handle it, but it is challenging. Part of it is because sometimes like they want to talk late at night. Like I want to go to bed. I got to get my sleep. Now you want to chat. And of course I want to be available to chat because that's precious time. But yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot happening in every direction. And so I just feel like I'm needed in a lot of things. And I haven't fully been able to give up all my previous roles as mom. Like, I don't know why this pops into my mind of just travel. Like if we ever go on a trip, I am the travel planner in our house.
Mm.
And that takes a lot. I mean, that's not just like the old days where you call a travel agent, I guess, and just say, we're going to Lake Tahoe, find a house or whatever. Like now it's just, you can have endless options online to look for everything. It takes a long time. And, and I do all the cooking in our house and my husband does the dishes, but just little things. I don't know. My daughter needed new basketball shoes and she ordered like 10 pairs, right? Tries them on and then they need to be returned. So just a simple thing like that, going through she does all fortunately the legwork, but then they need to be returned. I just feel like there's always stuff. There's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot of stuff. And you've got those senior parents as well. And there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of stuff. And and this is the thing, like, I really don't see a lot of people talking about what's really going on for women our age trying to be entrepreneurs when we can't just flick a switch and all of a sudden be really super duper available. It's just not really that way.
And I would say, I mean, health wise, I feel really lucky. I think that just talking about midlife, a lot of people talk about like, oh, menopause and there's such issues. I think the one problem for me has been when I was a teenager, I had migraines and then they went away after a couple of years. But after menopause, the migraines came back.
Oh.
And so my neurologist said, it's so interesting because it's the same thing that he often sees this because it's a hormonal issue. So that's my only issue is that I have to deal with like occasional, I know how to like ward them off now, but I'm lucky that I don't really have a lot of health issues that I'm dealing with, that I think a lot of women have different things that they don't talk about. Like somehow we feel like we can't talk about
it's true.
Changes that we go through, but I do have headaches. Like I was on a girls' getaway with some friends a few months ago, and we were just at brunch, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, a migraine is coming on. And they were like, what? I hadn't even told them that this is a thing I have to deal with. And I had to go to a quiet room. I had to take the medication. I had to sit for a while. And these are some of my closest friends, It's like, sorry, this is a thing for me. I got to deal with this.
Wow. Yeah, well, you're right. Menopause in general isn't talked about a lot. And that's come up a lot on these interviews. And I've talked to a lot of women who are working in the field, helping women with menopause. And for some reason, pregnancy was talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Breastfeeding wasn't talked about as much. Menopause, not as much. And there is a lot going on with it. I mean, one of the main things I'm hearing from women on this podcast is energy. They're really feeling a difference in their energy.
Oh, fortunately, I don't really have that. I think I feel very, I like to exercise. I feel like I need to exercise and get good sleep. Like I'm pretty committed to trying to.
Yeah, you mentioned the sleep, and I think that's definitely helping. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't always get it between the kids wanting to talk late. And I do have issues with like things running around in my head. Sometimes in the morning, my husband will say, uh-oh, what kept you up last night? How many things are spinning now? But in general, I make that a priority because I don't know. It's important for me to feel like I have to take care of myself because I am juggling. I feel like that. It's not a clown. Who is that circus person with all the plates in the air? That's how I feel. I feel like that's me.
Yeah, that sounds like it.
Yeah.
Where are you spending, like, what are you really focusing on with your business right now? What's the main focus?
Marketing. I have to focus more on marketing. That's what I should be focusing on because I really like the product. That's what I like doing is the actual product. But it's kind of like if you make a movie or you write a book and no one sees it or reads it, is it really something, and that's how I feel with the podcast. Like I love doing it, but if not enough people are able to hear it, where is it kind of going? And so that has been a focus that I need to put more into. And there's no just direct route. I wish there was just a prescription and people could say, do A, B, C, and D. And then I would do it because I'm a good girl and I would follow the rules. But it's not that way. There's a million different ways you can go. And so that's how I need to be putting more of my focus.
Definitely. Yeah, I hear you. If there was a prescription, I'd be all over it too.
Yeah.
It's funny. Just yesterday, it must have been the anniversary. It was the anniversary of my celebration of 1 million downloads for the original podcast.
Wow.
It was a year ago. Thank you. It was a year ago last week. And in the post, whenever it came up, I had broken down the milestones of when I hit 50,000, when I hit 100,000, and it kept going. And it's just fun to watch that as you do get more successful, things do pick up. And
it's like
that was
the tumbleweed or something, it goes and then it goes more and then it gets bigger. And that's great.
It was really fun. And I got a lot of response from just sharing that memory. And it was fun to see the response. But I started from 0 to absolute 0, hating Instagram, still don't love Instagram. It is a learning curve. That's what they say about marketing. 50% works. The problem is you just don't know what 50% it is.
But not doing anything is certainly not going to work. You got to try things.
It's very hard to be found. That's for sure. So tell me, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you and find the podcast and all of that?
Well, the podcast is everywhere podcasts are found, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all that. It's called What It's Like To. We also have a website called whatitsliketo.net, and you can sign up for mailing lists there. So that's generally, I also have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Those are all linked through our website. So you can contact me through any of those ways. I think it's fun to connect with people. And I love getting suggestions for guests. Sometimes people will say, my aunt does this really cool thing. You should interview her. And so I love hearing from people, feedback about the show or suggestions for guests.
That's great. I love it. So Elizabeth, I love your story. I love that you're what you're doing now really is a natural extension of your experience. And that's what I'm always saying to women who are stuck and unclear about what their passion is or what they want to do. You're already on the right path. You just don't see it. It's just a matter of thinking a little bit differently about what you've always been attracted to and what you've always been curious about. And it's just so much fun to see that happened again for you. Each step doing the next right thing, it just brought you to where you are now. It's super fun. So thank you so much for taking the time from your day to share all this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the words of encouragement.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so that's all for now. If you're listening and loving what you hear, please like and subscribe. Reviews are great too and much appreciated. And if you're a woman in the middle who's 50 or over and an entrepreneur and would also like to come on the show, please go to www.midlifeinterviews.com and fill out an application. We'd love to have you on to share your story. Thanks so much for listening. It's never too late for you to put yourself on your agenda. I'm Suzy Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you again soon. Now, real quick before we say goodbye, if you are connecting with this show, I'd love to invite you to a happiness breakthrough coaching session. It's my laser-focused coaching call that will help you get clear about what's getting in your way as a woman in the middle entrepreneur and confident about your next steps to more happiness in your next chapter. Head over to www.nextchapterbreakthrough.com. Talk to you soon.